Kaimon, and welcome to Stupid Ancient History, Stupid A-Level Greeks. The sun is not shining, it's very windy, but I am wearing a toga and eating olives, and today we're going to look at the creation of the Delian League. So as always, this comes with a disclaimer. This video is in no way a replacement for reading the original text, the original translations. That is the key thing you need to do for the A-level course. What this is intended to do is give you kind of the overview that sometimes can be a bit tricky to get from certainly the likes of Thucydides and the textbook, and we're going to look at some of the bigger issues rather than the fine detail. So previously on Stupid Ancient History we've been looking at the fallout from the Persian Wars of 480 BC, and we saw that whilst being, well, what can be best described as fair weather friends in their alliance against the Persians, the Hellenic League, things soon turn a bit nasty between Athens and Sparta. Sparta, following the actions of Pausanias, I mean, not that it was bad, but they had to wall him up in a temple to get rid of him. Because of the actions of Pausanias and the shame that brings, Sparta effectively starts shrinking away from any major role in the wider Greek world. Certainly they have no interest in the Ionian states. They are bearing the shame of Pausanias' actions and his purple trousers, and they are no longer really the dominant force. They're taking some time to go in, rediscover themselves. Meanwhile, Athens, on the other hand, they are massively buoyed up by their performance during the Persian Wars. The Athenians, again, as with Marathon, claim that they are the saviours of Greece. They are the ones who defeated the Persians. And again, they're driven on by people like Themistocles, who's able to use his achievements during the Persian Wars to become the main voice of Athens. I mean, people like Themistocles, it's not just him, they are pushing at full speed for Athens to dominate the Greek world. They see this is their time to shine, and Athens is on the rise, and they are willing to push quite hard and usually against Sparta to get this. However, Themistocles' actions are getting a bit too close to war for a lot of people in Athens. Certainly building his walls was a bad idea, so ultimately and thankfully he is held back and restrained by those in Athens who see the direction he's taking, people like the more moderate Aristides, and effectively he's ostracised for being a bit too pushy. So the next major step in the century, and really quite a pivotal moment in everything we'll be looking at, is in 477 when the Athenians create the Delian League. Now this is a really big deal and it underpins a lot of things that come later. So there's a lot to get through, so we're going to go through, the idea will be ultimately we'll go through the key parts of the league before we look at how it fits into the world and how it fits into Greek relations at the time, because I think they are both equally important, but you can't look at one without the other. So in a nutshell, the Delian League is a broad alliance between the, let's call them, allied states. At this point primarily Athens and these now Ionian Greek states all along that Aegean Sea coast, who are now wanting to break away from the Persian Empire, since the Persian Empire is massively in remission, and rejoin Greece. So it's almost like Ionian Revolt Mark II. It's the same seaboard, it's the same states who wanted to break away from the rule of Darius. Now with Xerxes on the back foot, definitely, they're taking a new opportunity to break away from Persia and rejoin the Greek world, this time with much more help from Athens. And on the face of it, the League acts as a defensive pact. The aim is to protect these newly freed Ionian states from being retaken by the Persians and Xerxes, to protect them from harm, if nothing else as a threat to Xerxes not to try and retake these states, And yeah, one of its main aims is to provide military support for any of its members. Again, the primary focus at this point is the Persians. And in order not to ruffle any feathers in the rest of Greece, this huge new power block emerging, no state is excluded from membership, regardless of their opinion, relationship or history with Athens. Because Athens, they are the one who set it up, they quickly establish themselves as the head of the league. But importantly, rather than setting this up as a rival to pre-existing leagues, the Peloponnesian League, the Hellenic League is still going in some way, shape or form. No state is refused entry. So let's have a look at the various chunks and various terms and details of the Delian League and what it was. I mean, we mentioned earlier how Themistocles was replaced by the more moderate Aristides, and this is really key before we start looking at it, because he is pivotal in the creation of the Delian League. A lot of this is nailed down to him, and if we're to believe people like Plutarch, his reputation and as being fair and his role in establishing the terms of the league are absolutely essential in getting it off the ground. With no Aristides, you could argue no Delian League, or certainly not a Delian League as it was. So what is it? Well, the Delian League gets its name from the island of Delos, which is on this map that you can see. It's one of the more central Cycladian islands. It's bang in the middle of the Aegean, and that's quite important. So they hold their first meeting in Delos, and this becomes the home of the league. Again, it's really important we look at the importance of Delos strategically. When they're setting this up, the Athenians don't want a headquarters in Athens because then it seems too prejudicial towards Athens. Similarly, they don't want something over on the Ionian coast because that is seen as more of an expeditionary thing. So Delos is ideal. It's also partly sacred. It is a sacred island, and this is another reason for putting it there. It's allegedly the birthplace of Artemis and Apollo, so this is why they choose it. The idea being that no one will interfere with something that's founded on sacred ground. Delos is also used to receiving kind of gifts and tributes, so it makes a good ideal place to set the Delian League up. It's nice neutral territory, and there's a lot in this. It almost seems like Athens are going out of their way to seem legitimate, to try and convince everyone that this is not a new Athenian-led gang. This is something different. This is all everyone in it together. And just in case anyone wasn't convinced about how legit this alliance was, the treasury that all member states have to pay into, again, is kept in Delos. So again, it's almost like the whole thing is countersigned by the gods, by Artemis and Apollo, and no one should be in any doubt that the Athenians are definitely not up to anything shady. So once the League have had its first meeting, as always with these things, the nuts and bolts and the detail of it need to be worked out. Now, annoyingly, it's not exactly clear how the Delian League functioned in terms of representation, how it worked. There are fragments, there are snippets, there are contradictory views. Whether it worked, we're not sure whether it worked on a kind of bicameral system like the Peloponnesian League, or kind of a more equal vote share like the Hellenic League, where each vote is representative of the same amount of influence, unlike the bicameral system where basically Sparta control the majority of the vote. To my mind, and again this is only my view, I would suggest it would be stupid for Athens to pursue this bicameral route where they obviously hold all the power, especially after they've gone to such end to make this league, or to create this league on an equal footing. So personally, I would suggest it's done on a kind of more equal vote system rather than bicameral. Simply, if if nothing else, the Athenians have gone to a lot of trouble to make it seem fair and balanced. Why would they then go for a system of voting where it's clearly not balanced? Equally, it'd be pretty desperate or stupid of the Ionians to join a league where effectively they pay all the money into this system but have none of the influence. So whichever way the league was organised, like I said, I would suggest equal vote share rather than bicameral. And high ideals aside, the Athenians made sure, regardless of the system, that they have stewardship and control the direction of the league from the very start. I mean, they're able to do this because, one, they are one of the major powers within this group. It's Athens and a collection of other states. They are the ones who organise it and set it up. But yeah, they are able to control the direction of the league from the outset. And this is not entirely by accident, but we'll come back to things like that later. So we've just raised the issue of payment of monies, which the league refers to as tribute, and obviously any organisation like this, it's going to need some cash. Initially, member states have had either to contribute all or some of the key tributes, and the key tributes are money, ships and men to man the ships. Initially, like we said, member states ideally have to contribute all three of these. In some cases it adapts to some of these, but money, ships and men, these are the key things that are needed, are asked for membership, and they're quite important. It's just by what they're asking for, it's clear that the Delian League, in whatever direction they head in or whoever's steering it, they aim to dominate the Aegean. Hence the emphasis on ships. They see controlling the Aegean and trade and flow of people across the sea. This is the key to power. So initially, the amounts contributed by each state are they are questionable, despite the fact that the Delian League love carving things into stone. There are the Delian Stellas, of course, which give details of this, but they seem questionable. And there's a degree, it seems, of misreporting from the likes of Thucydides and Diodorus. But the figure of 460 talents is usually put out there as the kind of the key value that states had to contribute, but as many people who say this is the right amount that was contributed, you'll find equal number of people saying that this is clearly a misrepresentation. But 460 talents is the number we have. This is arguably the initial contribution made by all states. What we can again suggest is that if Aristides and his reputation are so fundamental in creating the Delian League and effectively luring the states in, these Ionian states, that it would be a fair settlement, that the idea of having Aristides, who is famously regarded as the fair, as the man who is deciding tribute and how much people would pay, it makes sense that he would be fair to all the member states, and that would be a way to get them to join. So it seems that the reason for all the disagreement over the amount of tribute people had to pay is that, funnily enough, as the century progresses and things get a bit more fruity, the amount of tribute that's paid has to increase. So this is why there's some issue over how much is initially paid. But it's not just Aristides who has a massive hand in this league. I mean, he's certainly doing all the number crunching, he's working out all the fine details and the membership packs and all the boring stuff. While he's doing all that, the league obviously needs a military leader who can basically stick it to the Persians, because this is initially the purpose of this league, to fight the Persians and chase them out of the Ionian states. This is where we see the entrance of Kaimon. Now Kaimon, it seems, is equal part badass soldier and equal part peace-loving hippie. Or certainly for our purposes at least. If we start with the badass soldier side, I mean, Kaimon is the grandson of Miltiades, Remember him from the Ionian Revolt and the Battle of Marathon. And he certainly has this lineage to lead these combined forces. His family name will be known amongst the Ionians, if not the wider Greek world. Again, Miltiades, famous for Marathon. So having his grandson, who by his own right is quite skilled, leading this force is a bit of a coup. It's a really good thing. Like I said, according to the sources, he is a quite skilled leader. It seems the apple doesn't fall far from the tree with him. He has the right abilities, the skill and the wherewithal to lead this new Greek campaign against the Persians, and he continually wins successive minor but then quite major victories. He is definitely a man who can get stuff done. And apparently this is done with relative ease, if you're going to believe, if we believe Plutarch's biography. It's almost like there's little that gets in his way. But another important side to Kaimon, and again why he's quite key in the kind of softly building of this league, getting it off the ground, is that he's eager. What's important about him is his eagerness to build a kind of cooperation with Greece, and particularly with Sparta. So Plutarch, we'll go back to Plutarch's biography for this, but he dives straight in and from the get-go describes Kaimon as a Lacedaemonian sympathiser, a lover of Sparta, and points to the fact that Kaimon even calls his son Lacedaemonius. Bit of an obvious sign, naming your kid after Sparta. So this is going to be quite key into allowing this new military power to almost emerge without setting off any alarm bells in Greece. The idea would be that having someone like Kaimon, who is not shy about his fondness of Sparta, at the military head of this league would be reassuring to the quite wary Sparta that this massive military beast that is emerging, that also they could join if they wanted, this massive new military beast, the Delian League, with all its contributing ships and men and money, is at least under the command of someone who likes them. So it's basically there to salve the fears of the Spartans. So ultimately, Delian League, military alliance, Athens and the Ionians, tribute has to be paid in money, ships and men, and the military wing is led by Kaimon to go and attack the Persians and shoo them out of Ionian lands. That's all fair enough. That's cold hard second source view. So we need to look at the representation a bit in some of the sources. Again, we're now into its reception and how it fits in the century. So Thucydides and to some extent Plutarch's biography of Aristides, they're relatively straightforward in their coverage. It's very nuts and bolts. They both give details of tributes, while certainly with Plutarch contesting whether this is right. They both talk about the role of Aristides, and they both talk about the original intentions. They're Thucydides particularly very straightforward in there. This is what it is. Both, however, though, highlight that there is a divide in opinion that sits just behind the Delian League, particularly in Athens, about how this thing should be created. And the suggestion is that there are some in Athens, and again this is not unsurprising given that Athens is not a homogeneous group of people, different people have different views. The suggestion is that there are some in Athens who want to use the League to dominate this new world, not just protect the Ionians, but they want to use the League to create an Athenian dominance of the new Greek world. This is not, these are going to be the supporters of Themistocles, that same kind of ilk, those who see this is Athens' time to shine. And they want to rival Sparta militarily, and certainly within Plutarch there's even early references to this idea of an Athenian empire, and almost using the Delian League to build this. Now obviously this goes against the ideals of the likes of Aristides and Kaimon, who favour a more measured approach to certainly this contest with Sparta, and given that those two are kind of key in establishing the Delian League, we can say in its early years it almost did stick to its original intentions, but we cannot ignore that behind the Delian League, behind the increasingly precarious positions of Kaimon and Aristides, there are those who want to use the Delian League to rival Sparta for dominance of the Greek world. And this is obviously one of the massive themes of the unit, so this is why the Delian League is such a big deal. Now again, to further complicate the matters, we've now gone from the stage of this is the Delian League, money, ships, men, protect the Ionians. Behind that then we see this agenda from some aspects of Athens, some aspects of the Athenians to use this to control or dominate the wider Greek world. When we start looking at Plutarch's biography of Kaimon, we see another issue raise its head, and this is the relationship between Athens and her allies, or these new people joining the League. Now we should point out at this point, I'm very sorry that we keep going back to Plutarch and jumping around the sources. Again, the reason why Plutarch works so well in these situations is that the creation of the Delian League fits in Thucydides' coverage of the Pentacontatia, and we know it's a bit patchy, unlike some of his where he's writing about later events where he's incredibly detailed, almost to the point of tedium. At this point he's very brief, so Plutarch is a good source to fill in all the gaps with all the benefits and drawbacks Plutarch brings to any issue. So this is why we keep using the biographies, and they are definitely worth using to cross-reference at this point. So this relationship between Athens and her allies. So in Plutarch's Kaimon we're told that some members of the Delian League are struggling to meet their tribute demands, seemingly quite early on. Some of these states are struggling to pay. Not understandable, they're effectively in the middle of a war of liberation, and some are struggling to meet the demands. And it seems particularly in terms of men and ships. This would make sense. The Ionian states are quite wealthy, but think about the timeline. It's not that long since these Ionian states will have sent ships and men with Xerxes to attack Greece, and we know how that ended up. So they're going to be a bit thin on the ground. So they're struggling to pay. In response, it seems that members of the Athenian assembly demand that they be punished and made to pay up. And if they don't pay up, then the Athenians should take the tribute by force. Certainly not the kind of shiny, happy people view we get from looking at the likes of Aristides. So Kaimon, on the other hand, simply points out that he doesn't need or even want this tribute to continue his campaign against Persia, because he's got his men already, he's got his existing troops, and effectively they're becoming battle hardened. They're getting to the peak of their game, and the last thing he wants is a bunch of noobs coming in from this Ionian state who don't want to be there and just get in the way. So he actually refuses to basically bully the Ionians for this extra tribute. And this little episode, and it's a tiny little fragment in relative terms, it really does help illustrate this fragile nature of the Delian League's high ideals in this early stage. While someone like Kaimon is attempting to use it to liberate their Greek friends, we can see already, as well as behind the Delian League, you've got those who want to use it to dominate Greece. We see there are already, from its early instance, there are already those eyeing up the Delian League as an opportunity to boost Athenian power and wealth. So what we start to see is this schism between the allies and Athens. The Athenians demand, the allies pay what they can, and if they can't, depending on who's steering the Delian League at the time, will determine how the Athenians deal with that. Again, this is something to bear in mind for later on, because this becomes problematic. And talking of problematic, I mean, most of the focus so far has been on Athens and its allies and the creation of this league. But we should also look at how the creation of this league was received elsewhere in the world. And obviously we've got to look at Sparta and the Peloponnesians, because this thing just popping up out of the sea, effectively as a military rival, potential military rival at this point. This is going to go down not great with a lot in Sparta, to be fair, or their allies, particularly Corinth, who like to think of themselves as kind of the naval wing of the Peloponnesian League to some extent. So we've got to look at how this goes down. And again, here Thucydides is really, really patchy. I mean, he's too busy grinding his axe with Athens, and much as he tries to be neutral-ish about the creation of the Delian League, we know he's setting some big traps for those later on. So again, Plutarch's not terribly useful. So what we have to do ultimately is skip to a different author, Diodorus Siculus, Diodorus of Sicily. And in his Library of History, the reference is 1150. Diodorus puts forward a very interesting event. He suggests that the Delian League, the creation of it, is really not well received in Sparta at all, and that by 475, 2 years after its creation, he gives the details of this debate in Sparta about whether they should go to war with Athens straight away. And it seems they are very close to the brink of war, and ultimately are only held back by a single member of the Spartan government, who manages to calm everyone down, manages to convince them that now is not the time, but let's keep an eye on them. So it gives very detailed description of this debate and the various arguments. Ultimately, the Spartans are sad or annoyed that they've, what Diodorus refers to as, lost control of the sea. You could question just how much the Spartans ever had control of the sea anyway. They've lost control of the sea to the Athenians, and this should be a reason for war, to put Athens back in the place and re-establish Sparta's dominance. I mean, the loss of control of the sea obviously is going to be a reference to this new Delian League navy that's being built. So they discuss going to war, and they ultimately decide against because of the act of this one member of the Spartan government. Now, whilst this is probably the best account, or the fullest account we have of this period and these events, we've got to be very, very careful with Diodorus as a source. He is writing significantly after the period, which, you know, historians generally do. But this leads us to significant problems with his work. The first one being, he is writing a grand history of pretty much everything, the Library of History, basically the history of the lot. So he's taking a much broader view of the world, rather than focusing specifically on certain issues like Herodotus or Thucydides, who may have a more nuanced and more detailed view. He sees it very much in broad brushstrokes. The other problem we have generally with Diodorus is that he seems to be a bit of a victim of mistranslation or misinformation. He relies heavily on certain sources that very often contradict the big hitters like Thucydides and Herodotus and later writers, but he goes with this line anyway. So we see he sometimes gets some things confused, if not pretty much wrong. And a good example of this would be, again, if you're listening to this as revision and you've finished the whole year of the course, you will, once you read Diodorus 1150, you will see there are massive, massive similarities between what is said in this speech and the speech between, the debate between Sthenelaidas and Archidamus 40 years later. It's almost, the arguments are almost word for word. The outcome is different, but it's very, very similar. So similar that it would raise an eyebrow, if nothing else, in terms of reliability. Also, again, if you're studying this in relation or in combination with the Sparta unit, we should also flag up that this is the only instance of this particular council, the Gerousia or Gerousia, debating foreign policy. We have no other evidence of this, so either Diodorus is a master of research and can find the things no one else can, or he's got something wrong. Either way, if we look at Diodorus, it seems, funnily enough, Sparta are not best pleased with the creation of the Delian League. So in summary then, creation of the Delian League, this is the next step on the road to war between Athens and Sparta. This is the next chunk in the Thucydides trap that's pushing these two to war. It's established with the goal of freeing the Ionians from Persia. There's a tribute to be paid of money, men and ships by all states, and this was originally assessed by Aristides the Fair, and these ultimately paid for military operations under the direction of Kaimon to liberate and defend the Ionian states. Delian League in a nutshell. The impact, however, if we look at the kind of nuanced bits behind all the basic facts, we can see that some people, elements of the Athenian political system, want to use this Delian League not just as a way to protect the Ionians, but as a means to challenge Sparta. It's there in the background. There's always someone thinking about what we can do with this. We see early on that there are issues with being able to pay tribute, so maybe it wasn't as fair as we would like to think, and this strains the relationship between Athens and our allies. And we also see some negative reaction from Sparta, which is, alright, the source may be a little dubious, but still valid, because pretty much everything is dubious for these sources, and it absolutely makes sense that Sparta would be at least a little concerned about the creation of this large military power under the control of their long-term rivals, Athens. So again, back into the picture of the century, the Thucydides trap is now beefed up. The Spartans have got the Peloponnesian League, the Athenians have now got the Delian League, so we've moved from a clear dominant power with Sparta to two rival powers just sat there waiting for something to happen to get them to kick off. I mean, if you want to compare it to a modern history example, this is basically the origins of the First World War, but in Greece. Two leagues shouldn't necessarily come into conflict with each other, but ultimately they're gonna. So, thank you for listening. That's been our quick overview of the Delian League and its reception. Hope this has been useful and not too tedious. Leave us a comment below, especially if you think I've missed anything. And until next time, goodbye.